Meeting him, I felt like I had met the sage of Buddhism for the modern world, or the Dharma. There's something so pure about his spirit, but also so deep about his vision, that I realized the teachings and understandings that have been carried for thousands of years were being expressed through Ari in a way that could affect people's, not just their inner hearts and minds, but the whole way that we lived as a community in the modern world. And I was moved and inspired by that.
This is something that we have not, including my father, something that we have done in this particular birth, but it's a journey that all of us have traversed throughout our samsara for many births, and maybe we will continue this for many births to come.
He's like a bodhisattva energy, you see. And so I call people like him spiritual, vibrational placeholders for the next level of our unfoldment. They hold the vibration of where we're all going until we get there.
I deem it a pleasure and an honor indeed to be able to talk about my lifelong friend and later the globally reputed human leader, Dr. A.T. Ariyaratne. I am fortunate that we shared the same village. We were born at Unawatuna in the deep south. I have a feeling that from childhood on, my friend A.T., I describe him as my younger brother, had a tremendous privilege. He was able to get a world view, as it were, from his childhood on. His birthplace, his home, is perched at the top of a little hill. When this little person looked at the world outside, he would have day in and day out seen the vast Indian Ocean stretching in front of him. He would have, I am sure, wondered what lay beyond the horizons that he was able to see. That would have made him yearn to go beyond the horizons that he has seen when he was a child living at the top of that little hill.
මම හිටියේ සහෝදර විපාකයකින්. මට අවුරුදු 7ක් වෙනකන් සහෝදරයෝ නැහැ. ඉතින් අපේ අම්මට නොයෙක් සාන්ති කර්ම කරනවා. ඒ හිටපු අපේ තාත්තගේ අම්මයි තාත්තයි. ඉතින් සාස්ත්‍ර කාර්යෝ ගෙදරට එනෝනේ. ඉතින් එක සාස්ත්‍රකාරයෙක් කිව්වා බොහොම වාසනාවන්ත පිරිමි ළමයෙක් හම්බෙන්න.
Ahangamagi Theodaria Ratna was born on 5th November 1931 in the southern coastal village of Unawatuna, Sri Lanka. Ari, as is known by his friends and family, grew up as the son of a businessman and village leader, Hendrik Jinadasa and Rosalina Gajadira.
He was always guided by the principles of Buddhism because he lived in the vicinity of a very well-known temple. And as a result, invariably, he would have been influenced by the teachings of the Buddha. The rites and rituals that went on in the neighboring temple would have been part of the format within which he grew up as a child.
Growing up under the guidance of learned Buddhist monks, Ari memorized scriptures, practiced virtues, cultivated boundless love for humanity.
When I see heaps of coconut husks everywhere here and coconut trees around and the sea on that side, my house on this side, immediately my mind goes back to my 14th year when I was attending Mahinda College. Every day I got 25 cents for my tea from my home. So I was getting onto the main road on my push bicycle when a lady stopped me, one Lucinonak I remember, and then she asked for 25 cents. Those days measure of rice was 25 cents. So I gave it to her and went to school. Then a couple of days later I was walking on the seashore when I saw her spinning coconut fiber. Then I asked her how much she earned every week. She said 2 rupees a week. And then I asked her how much the middleman earning. She didn't know. So I went and found out middleman was earning about 8 rupees, 4 times more than what she was earning. And the export company to which middleman was selling this stuff, they were selling it is twice the price. So actually this worker got 1/16 of what she deserved. So I started the first cooperative Koya Worker Society in my village at the age of 14. And I was there as the secretary for 2 full years when others took over.
His sensitive years were spent in the days of the Second World War. In 1939, when the war broke out, those of who lived in the southern coastal village of Unawatuna too felt the echoes of this universal carnage. Ari's family temporarily moved to Maddakanda, a village wrapped in the upcountry mountains, a safe haven, so peaceful and serene. In the end, millions of people were dead and millions rendered homeless. Factories and workshops were in ruins. Farmlands, forests, and vineyards ripped to pieces. Yet, new borders were drawn by victorious nations. The Great British Empire which controlled so much of Asia, was on its last legs and soon to disappear in the face of rising nationalist movement that emerged from India. 2 years since the war ended, Mahatma Gandhi and his followers guided India towards independence. Exactly a year later, in 1948, Sri Lanka also steered their way to win a restricted political freedom from colonizers. A group of elites who were outgrowth of the colonial structure surfaced as new rulers. Common man expected a change in values, culture, religion, language, and literature. But almost a decade passed by with no significant changes.
Right through my education at Mahinda College and even in my own village, I was not happy with the social economic structure in which we were living. And I thought nothing short of a total revolution can bring about some kind of happy, contented joy for the people as a whole. And to me at that time, the only philosophy I could accept was the communist ideology. I read every document I could put my hands on, but I thought at one stage when I read the killings in Russia and other places, which had to be carried out to realize that kind of revolution, we needed a different kind of revolution. A revolution not only in the structures, but revolution in the consciousness of people, revolution in the way people do things, the principles they accept and the morality they follow. All these things were necessary for a total revolution. Kind of revolution we needed was certainly a non-violent one. So the germs, the seeds of revolution have to be planted in a proper soil. So the Buddhist philosophy and the Buddhist culture prevailing in my village, in my country, was perfectly suitable for a non-violent total revolution in my country, and we need not look to outside violent ways of doing things.
In 1957, while teaching at Nalanda College, a leading Buddhist school in Sri Lanka, Ari got an opportunity to visit India for the first time.
When Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated, I was a teenager. Actually, I was 16 years of age. I heard the news at a railway station. The moment I saw the headlines, somehow tears came to my eyes. I didn't know why. Only thing I knew was there was a great man who tried to bring about a freedom struggle in India without shedding blood, but with non-violence and love, has been shot by a criminal. Now that was enough for me to get my heart melted, and I really cried. Then I was interested in finding out who this Mahatma Gandhi was. And subsequently, a few years later, I had the opportunity to come to India. I couldn't see Mahatma Gandhi, then he was dead and gone, but I was able to meet Acharya Vinoba Bhave, who was his principal spiritual heir. I met him and I walked with him in his Bhudan or land gift movement, and I was very much inspired by him. Later I was inspired by Sri Jayaprakash Narayan, Asha Devi, Moraji Desai, and so many other leaders who were followers of Mahatma Gandhi. During my second visit to India, there was a big new education fellowship conference in New Delhi, which was attended by Sri Jawaharlal Nehru and several other great Indian leaders. And for the first time I heard the word Sarvodaya, a word coined by Mahatma Gandhi in 1908. So I immediately decided, when I returned home, I would call the Shramadana movement we had initiated the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement.
Mahatma Gandhi combined two Sanskrit words, Sarvam and Udayam, to coin the word Sarvodaya. He explained it as welfare of all. Ari gave a deeper meaning to the same word based on Buddha's teachings. He interpreted the word Sarvodaya as awakening of all, which combines spiritual and social change and emphasizes enlightenment through sharing.
I was wondering whether preparing students for examinations, giving them a textbook-based, classroom-oriented education for the purpose of passing exams and getting jobs, is it the right kind of education? I thought that was not education. Education is total personality awakening of the individual to face every possible challenges in life satisfactorily and live a life of joy, life of happiness. So I thought ways and means of doing it through service to humanity. So I thought, being a teacher at Nalanda College, I could start a sustained movement for uplifting the poor. So with my experience with another colleague who helped me to understand the backward communities, I was able to select one of those villages called Kanatuluwa.
Kanatuluwa is a village situated 67 miles away from the capital city of Colombo. 40 poverty-stricken families lived in this village. They were one of the poorest, marginalized and oppressed in the island Ceylon in late 50s. These people were classified as untouchables, belonging to a caste called Rodia. They did not receive social recognition as equals. For generations, men, women and children of this village managed their existence through begging. They were not even allowed to cover their upper bodies by the higher caste. Children had no schooling facility. eating houses, hairdressers, and similar places closed their doors on them. Worst of all, even the monks did not accept their alms or cater to their religious needs. They were truly and surely outcasts.
Kanatulu camp was the beginning of a new era, not only to ourselves, I believe to our country also. Mrs. Bandaranaike, who was the wife of the Prime Minister at that time, visited this village, which was a great help for us, and we got very wide publicity in the national press. Breaking caste barrier was my hidden, unexpressed wish at that time was fulfilled. To the outsiders, what we were doing was really revolutionary. That is, very well-to-do teachers, students, others coming down to a lowliest kind of village, doing physical work, transforming the village physically, also socially by interacting with them as equals. That was a revolutionary thing for people. Hundreds who visited and saw our work. But for us, it was something different. We used to call it, we build the road builds us.
We build the road. This expresses, I would call this the compassionate commitment that one makes to the well-being of others. And also, since when engaged in this activity, one is not just acting alone, building the road as a single individual, but one is working together with a group, so one has to learn to act within the dynamics of a group, when to express one's own opinions about how the road should be built, when one should stop and listen to others, when one should put aside one's preferences and accept the ideas of others, when one should defend one's own preferences and try to make others understand them. And so building the road is also a process of learning how to cooperate with others, to collaborate with others.
Actually, I think a lot of the genius of this Sarvodaya movement and of the mind of Ari that has brought this forward over the decades is captured in the slogan, "We build the road and the road builds us." Oh, that's what a perfect way to convey the central teaching of the Lord Buddha that reflects the great reciprocity at the heart of the universe. What you do affects you in return. It is not a linear process. This may be unique to Ari.
Ari believes in a holistic approach to development. He emphasizes that awakening should take place in 6 integrated sectors, namely spiritual, moral, cultural, social, economic, and political. Ari is of the view that we can build an alternative society based on the teachings of the Buddha as applicable to challenges of the 21st century.
I think it's important to see the ethical principles of Buddhism not merely as a code for one's own personal moral and inner spiritual development, but also to look at them deeply and to see what are their implications for the situations that we face in the world today. And when I try to look at the world situation today, I see certain terrible crises, persistent crises, which stem from a neglect of these fundamental ethical principles of the Dharma. And when we speak about engaged Buddhism or even of Buddhism, we have to realize that the way I would understand it, what the Buddha teaches is what we call the Dharma. And from one angle, the Dharma is that which sustains us and supports us in our quest for liberation. But the Dharma also is what supports us and sustains us in our efforts to forge a harmonious, peaceful, and just human society.
When people participate in any Sarvodaya activities, their primary objective should be to practice Satara Brahma Viharana or 4 sublime abodes to awaken the person within. Metta, loving kindness to all living beings. Karuna, compassionate action to help alleviate suffering in many forms. Mudita, dispassionate or altruistic joy derived from engaging in community action. Upeka, equanimity, a state of mind that does not get disturbed by loss or gain, fame or blame, success or failure. Similarly, when large groups gather, they are guided by Satara Sangraha Vastu or 4 principles of group conduct to awaken the community. Dhana, sharing, Priyavachana, pleasant speech, Arthacharya, constructive activity, and Samanatmata, equality in association.
As Westerners, those of us who went to India and Thailand and Burma to learn meditation, we tended to focus much more on the interior transformation of mindfulness and compassion and loving kindness, which we need and the world desperately needs. What we didn't attend to or recognize is that the temples were actually community centers where people came over thousands of years for education, for medicine, to make community decisions, to support one another in difficulties, support the flowering of their village or their community, and that all of this goes back to the very origins of both Buddhist teachings and the collective wisdom of India and Asia as a whole. We were so focused on our own inner needs, both our own sufferings and the confusion in Western society where everything was external, that we needed to search for something internal. And it's only in recent years that we've begun to really see the treasures of community and mutual support and engagement in the world that are equally a part of these ancient and transformative teachings.
After attaining enlightenment at Bodh Gaya, the Buddha went to Saranath, and it was there that he preached his first discourse, Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. In his very first sermon, the Buddha said, "I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering." This sermon is centered on the 4 noble truths, which are the foundation of Buddhism. The truth of suffering, dukkha, the truth of the cause of suffering, samudaya, the truth of the end of suffering, nirodha, the truth of the path that frees us from suffering, marga.
What Ari has done is to see these early teachings of the Buddha focused on community, and then to bring them out in a brilliant and new form for modern times. He uses the diagnosis of suffering to look individually at a village or a family or a community and see the disharmony, the economic injustice, the conflict with people, the poverty, the lack of respect, all as expressions of dukkha or suffering. And then, in the most brilliant way, he says, let us look at the causes. What is the greed? What is the fear? What is the ignorance? What is the confusion? What is the cycle of anger or hurt that keeps this going? And as he does, he then presents this as the beginning of the story. And that the end of the story is that there is a possibility to transform this, to release this suffering, and that there's a systematic path to do so. Having these tools and his own brilliant vision of how to communicate and translate this to villagers, to community members, and then later to the whole broader society, allows people to have an understanding, oh, our lineage, our tradition in Sri Lanka, and really worldwide, our human tradition, can see clearly, here is suffering, here is its causes, and here is the path to the end of suffering.
Two things come together, Buddhism and its values and ideals and so forth, and practical help to people. And I really hadn't seen that before, so I became very intrigued from that point on by the way in which Ari is both poetic and practical, that he has these ideals. And for most people, it seemed to stay often on the level of an ideal, but he knew how to translate it into practical help to people that I think has probably done more to actually improve people's lives than other engaged Buddhist leaders and movements that I can think about in terms of the number of people helped and the number of kinds of programs and also the whole manner of engagements.
The word Shramadana literally means gift of labor. It had a magical attraction. It captured the moral imagination of thousands. In effect, Shramadana action spreads faster than Sarvodaya thought. Between 1958 and 1966, more than 300,000 volunteers were taken to hundreds of rural sites to participate in community development projects. This gift of labor concept spread through the country. It took the form of building and repairing houses, schools, construction of water wells, latrines, bridges, cleaning of irrigation canals, planting trees, and 100 other activities.
What Sarvodaya did in those right from the early years was to bring in Tamils and also Muslims when they would have their village meetings, which they called Pawal Hamua, family gatherings. They would honor, at the beginning, there would be an honoring of the faiths, but they would begin with the minority faith. And there would be pause to give homage to the sacred in Hindu terms and in Christian terms and in Muslim terms before the majority religion of Buddhism. There was an assumption that we were all aiming for a peaceful, fair, just world. That everyone's true nature had the seeds of true awakening in them.
Sarvodaya has succeeded in developing programs at 6 levels, namely personality awakening, family awakening, rural community awakening, urban community awakening, national awakening, and global awakening.
The most valuable aspect of Sarvodaya's journey and the journey of my father is that Sarvodaya's message of awakening of all has reached out to the hundreds and thousands of individuals in this country, from the children who are yet to be born, as well as youth, mothers, farmers and elders, and distinguished various personalities in this country.
Another thing I learned from Ari and Sarvodaya was the importance of self-esteem. Right from the start, in the trainings, I remember, for the village workers, for the community organizers, the young teachers would say, bring out their natural dignity. We were once Dhammadvipa, the Isle of Righteousness. We were once the Danyagara, the treasure house, the pearl of the Indian Ocean, the treasure house of wealth. This was true historically. And so what was held up for them was not a picture of the glamorous, industrialized, modernizing West back then, but a mirror of their own greatness before the colonizers came.
One of the key aspects of the Buddha's teaching is following the Noble Eightfold Path, or the middle path. Middle path is also viewed as a path to self-purification. According to Buddha's teachings, a person who adjusts his life based on the Noble Eightfold Path will be free from miseries both in this lifetime and hereafter.
In a way, it's a sort of perfect manifestation of some of these values of Buddhism that sound so idealistic. You just think, those are great ideas, but we live in the real world, so maybe we'll think about them to make us feel better, but we have to deal with this unpleasant reality. Well, he's really showing that it's possible. It could be possible to live in a way that is more or less trying always to get closer and closer to those ideals. Well, actually, the Buddha believes this too. The Buddha one day refused to give a speech in a village. Everyone wanted to hear the words of the sage, and he said, first feed this hungry man. So Ari takes that and he says, there's a lot of hungry people in Sri Lanka, and there are people who are cold, and there are people who are sick, and the Buddha tended to a sick disciple. So we can live these things on a societal level if we decide that we really want to. There's the 10 basic needs, and everyone should have those 10 basic needs met.
After having participative discussions with many thousands of villagers, Sarvodaya identified 10 basic needs that must be satisfied in a just society. It highlights not only economic and social needs, but also spiritual, moral, and cultural requirements. They are clean and beautiful environment, clean and adequate supply of water, minimum supply of clothing requirements, adequate supply of food, basic health care, a modest house, energy requirements, basic communication, total education, and spiritual and cultural needs.
Sarvodaya is almost a model of a kind of complete alternative society. It is so thorough in a sense, and it's such a manifestation of the principle of interdependence, because you start to work on one issue and you realize, oh, that's all interconnected with this other issue, and you work there and it's interconnected with another. So you grow slowly, but you realize you're working on many fronts at once, but again, always with this foundation of some of these Buddhist values.
In the year 1969, the world celebrated the birth centenary of the leader of the Indian freedom movement, Mahatma Gandhi. Sarvodaya launched its 100-village development program to commemorate this event. It is a coincidence that Ari received the illustrious Raman Magsaysay Award for Community Leadership in the same year.
Pito Bhavatu Lokocha, meaning, may all beings in the universe be well and happy with one such thought, working for a noble idea.
For his non-violent approach to community development, in 1996, Ari became the second recipient of the Gandhi Peace Award from the Government of India. In the following years, Ari got nominated for the prestigious Nobel Peace Award 3 times.
I knew I wanted to meet this man. And as we met, the softness and the gentility and the compassion and the kindness and the kind of bodhisattva Buddha mind was very present. So I could see when he was in his activism state, and when he was speaking, the fire and the passion was there. And then when he was embracing all of us in the quiet moments, you could see his tenderness and his loving kindness. And he was modeling both, how to hold the space of love and kindness, and how to take that loving kindness into a passionate declaration for what needed to be done and what needs to be done on the planet.
He's an extraordinary person because, first of all, his humility is very endearing, and despite the fact that he's making amazing social change, he never really takes credit for anything. He is a champion of Buddhist economics, which is basically empowering local people economically. He's an activist, but not the usual strident, angry activist. I would call him a sacred activist. And he's a champion of spirituality because he believes in the power of meditation and the fact that consciousness is a field that permeates what we are calling the psychosphere.
So actually we have been working for over 6 decades, 60 years. In my case, entire 60 years was spent for that. Throughout this period, the only theory we followed were the teachings of the Buddha, which is not a dogma, which is a universal teaching to which nobody can object. When we practiced various programs to face challenges in our society, only looking at Buddha Dhamma, whether it is correct way of doing things to get good means to good ends, that was all we were concerned. Then out of that practice we formed our own theories. For example, in a village development program or a country development program, main thing you need is psychological oneness. That is, people as a whole should come into a psychological environment where they decide, yes, we need a road to our village, we will build it.
The whole movement was like one of the greatest spiritual, social movements I've ever seen. From small babies to mothers who could not take care of their children, to schooling. There was just so much. He touched so many aspects of a human being's development under the guise, not guise, but under the vibration of his spiritual mentorship and his dynamic of being a very strong spiritual man.
Almost a decade after receiving independence from British, Sri Lankan politics took an ugly turn. The elitist rulers switched parties, created their own power centers based on religious and communal grounds. Some even promised majority rule, all for grabbing power. Sadly, many citizens fell for this political eyewash.
After 1956, this Sinhala-only Act came into existence. There were riots for and against, and for the first time in our memory, communal disturbances started. So we thought one of the ways of doing it was to organize Ramadana camps, say in Jaffna. And for the Nirveli Kaidari road building, we took a train load of people, over 1,000 people, Sinhalese, Tamils, Buddhists, Christians, Buddhist monks, to Jaffna. And with about 4,000 people from Jaffna, we had a 1-week-long camp. We brought people from the north and east, also to villages in the south. In that way, right through, we contributed to prevent this becoming aggravated and becoming a violent kind of confrontation.
Yet, with all the hard work put in to bridge the divide between communities, worst ever communal violence took place in Sri Lanka in 1983, shattering the peace and harmony. The entire country went up in flames overnight. During these worst communal riots faced in Sri Lanka, Ari and his Sarvodaya Shanti Sena Peace Brigade fearlessly took to the streets, risking lives and limbs against parties of vested interest, lethal underworld, and even powerful political elements to prevent violence against minority Tamils. In the ensuing months, Sarvodaya launched a series of interfaith dialogues, mass peace meditations, and peace walks across the country to begin the process of healing.
We believe that wars begins in the minds of people. Unless you clean the mind from all kinds of differences, communal hatred, religious differences, religious hatred, and teach the people the importance of having a mind which has nothing but loving kindness towards all living beings, and the collective aggregate of all those thoughts will create a kind of critical mass of consciousness that will affect the minds of all the other people, and who will then feel, oh, let us get rid of violence. So while everybody else was concentrating on other things, we were concentrating mainly on the mind, purification of the mind from all forms of hatred.
Since 1983, Ari has led over 1,000 multi-religious mass peace meditation programs across the country, including war-ravaged North and East during the height of civil unrest. The zenith of this effort was a gathering of over 800,000 peace lovers belonging to all faiths to meditate upon lasting peace. This probably the world's largest meditation program ever held in the history of mankind.
There's something mysterious about the way that we tend our own hearts and minds and its effect on others. Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh says, when we are well, our well-being spills out on others. When we are unwell, our unwellness spills out on others. One of the gifts that many gifts that Ari has given to the people of Sri Lanka is to bring people together to experience their inner wellness, their care, their compassion, their love, their mindfulness. And in bringing hundreds and then thousands and then hundreds of thousands of people together, he made a field in which people could remember this possibility and begin to embody it.
His participation in sacred activism, in Buddhist economics, and now influencing the political world are of immense value, and there's no one who has done this in a way that actually could be an example for all other leaders. I consider Ari one of the most important luminaries of our time, and I think other leaders could learn a lot from him. His humility, his grace, his power, and his deep understanding of consciousness and how consciousness is the only solution to the world's problems. If we had just listened to him carefully and follow his examples, I think there's hope for humanity, and we could then actually create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, and healthier world. He is an example of love and action. love without action is irrelevant, and action without love is meaningless. But when you have both, as Ari exemplifies, you can change the world.
What really is going to be the decisive factor in the survival of Sarvodaya and also survival of our world is the message that it has tried to convey to not just the Sri Lankans but also the whole world, that there is an alternative path that each and every individual can embark upon to translate one's own inner being, one's own inner heart and mind for the betterment of not only oneself but also for the betterment of the whole humanity.
So far what we have practiced is a drop in the ocean, because Buddha's teachings is so vast. What we have taken is a handful out of a large forest, handful of leaves out of a large forest. Therefore, in the future, I hope our second and third generations who have taken over the implementation of this movement will be able to add a little bit more from the teachings to the well-being of all people in our country and in the world.